4 cities are going head to head in a race to build Australia's tallest skyscraper. We have Sydney in one corner, then Melbourne and Brisbane, and last but not least, the Gold Coast. Hey, I'm Luis, and today we're gonna take a look at this exciting, record-breaking race. Which of these cities will manage to build Australia's next tallest skyscraper? Or will all of them just fall short? Sydney is probably the most well-known city in this contest. By population, it's the second largest city in Australia. And when it comes to skyscrapers, it's a heavyweight. In 1967, it built the first ever skyscraper in the whole of Australia, the 170-meter tall Australia Square Tower. They built more in the 1970s, including this one, which cleared the 200-meter mark for the first time. That didn't just make it the tallest building in Australia, it was the tallest building in the whole of the Southern Hemisphere, and it held that record for 9 years. During that time, Sydney was Australia's undisputed skyscraper champion. But everything changed in 1986 when a new challenger entered the ring. The city of Melbourne built Rialto Towers, an office building which soared to an impressive 251 meters. It was the tallest building in Australia and in the Southern Hemisphere for 5 years, until it was eventually topped out by 120 Collins Street. But this skyscraper was also in Melbourne, and for the next 14 years, nothing else could top it. In other words, Melbourne had stolen Sydney's crown. Then in 2005, almost out of nowhere, the Gold Coast burst onto the scene. The city is much smaller than Sydney and Melbourne, and it was also far less famous. That's part of the reason why the city got involved in this race to build giant skyscrapers. It wanted to make a name for itself, and smashing Australia's skyscraper record was a pretty good place to start. So the Gold Coast built the Q1 Tower, a cutting-edge skyscraper which stood at a staggering 322 meters. It was the first building in Australia to pass 300 meters, dwarfing the previous record holders in Sydney and Melbourne. A year later, Melbourne revealed another new skyscraper of its own, the Eureka Tower, whose roof was actually a fair bit higher than the roof of the Q1. But the Q1 also had a taller spire on top, so officially speaking, the Eureka didn't manage to beat it. The Gold Coast has been building high-rises and skyscrapers ever since. They've put together this dramatic skyline. But there's still one city we need to talk about, because the Gold Coast has a famous neighbor, Brisbane, just an hour or so up the coast. Brisbane was a bit of a late arrival on the skyscraper scene, but in the last few years, since the Gold Coast unveiled the Q1 Tower, Brisbane has built some impressive skyscrapers of its own. This is the 270-meter Brisbane Sky Tower, which opened in 2019. And this is the one, 260 meters, opened in 2021. None of Brisbane's new skyscrapers are quite as tall as the Gold Coast Q1 Tower though. Actually, even though it's 20 years old, the Q1 Tower is still the tallest building in Australia. Brisbane hasn't beaten it, Sydney hasn't beaten it, and Melbourne hasn't beaten it either. But that could all be about to change. Melbourne and Sydney want their crown back. Brisbane wants the crown for the first time, and the Gold Coast won't go down without a fight. Soon, we'll take a look at some record-breaking plans which could turn this race on its head. But first, let's find out why these Australian cities are so keen to build skyscrapers in the first place. It isn't just about breaking records. These buildings are also pretty useful. See, skyscrapers are incredibly efficient structures if you're looking to maximize floor space. Just imagine you had a 1000 square meter plot of land. If you build a 1-story building on that plot, you'd get a floor space of 1000 square meters. If you build a 5-story building on the exact same plot, you'd get a floor space of 5000 square meters. And if you build a skyscraper with 100 stories, you'd get 100,000 square meters. I know, it's a simple example, but still, it helps to show how much floor space you get from a skyscraper, compared to something shorter. You can use the space for commercial offices. 120 Collins Street is a good example. With 65,000 square meters of office space, the tower supports thousands of jobs. You can also build residential skyscrapers, which give people a place to live. That's important in Australia where the population is growing, and the Australian government is hoping to build more than 1 million new homes by 2029. The Q1 Tower is actually residential. It has enough floor space for 526 apartments. In other words, it's no wonder these cities want to build them. Having said that, while skyscrapers can be good for a city, these buildings are far from perfect. They cast massive shadows, shutting out sunlight for the people living below. They can also block flight paths and create wind tunnels. Luckily, in Australia there are rules and regulations which are meant to minimize these problems. For example, around airports there are areas of protected airspace, which buildings aren't allowed to penetrate. You can think of these like invisible corridors in the sky. Planes use these corridors to fly in and out. If a skyscraper stuck up in the middle of one, it wouldn't end very well. There are also regulations for overshadowing. For example, you cannot build a skyscraper whose shadow falls across a public park. These spaces need sunlight, and that's protected by the law. Although there are ways to get around this. Take a look at this insanely creative tower block in Sydney. It uses a heliostat, basically a bunch of motorized mirrors, to reflect sunlight down into the area where the building casts a shadow. It's very cool, but hard to pull off. So most skyscrapers in Australia are just built in areas where their shadows won't cause a problem. Just to be clear, regulations like these ones are not exclusive to Australia. But on the whole, they're definitely stricter here than in places like Dubai. The Q1 tower may be huge by Australian standards, but it doesn't even come close to giants like the Burj Khalifa. That isn't just because Australia has tighter regulations, but the regulations definitely don't help. These rules also add an extra layer to this race to build Australia's tallest skyscraper. As well as the ones we've looked at, Australia also has height limits. Even if you're not disrupting airspace, and even if you're not overshadowing a park, your skyscraper still can't exceed a certain height. And there is an important element to these height limits, which has huge implications for this race. Here's the thing. These limits aren't set at a national level. They aren't even set at a state level. No, they're set city by city. The height limit is different in Sydney, say, than it is in Brisbane or Melbourne. And the city with the highest build limit would surely have a big advantage in this race. So a quick reminder, to overtake the Q1 tower, an Australian skyscraper would need to be taller than 322 meters. Straight away, that means Brisbane is screwed. In this city, the height limit is just 275 meters. Some people have pushed to change that, but so far, they haven't had much luck. There's a busy airport in the city, and authorities think that a higher limit would disrupt the paths of planes. This is why the two tallest buildings in Brisbane are both less than 275 meters. They are straining the height cap to the limit, but they aren't allowed to cross it. So we can rule out Brisbane in the race to beat the Q1 tower. But what about its neighbor, the Gold Coast? Even though the cities are so close together, the Gold Coast has very different rules. Actually, their height limits are so loose and relaxed that they barely even exist. That's what allowed them to build the Q1 tower in the first place. A skyscraper which never would have got past the rules in Brisbane. As the mayor of the Gold Coast recently said, Brisbane's loss is our gain. Then there's Sydney. 10 years ago, Sydney's height limit would have ruled it out exactly the same as Brisbane. But unlike Brisbane, Sydney authorities recently agreed to raise the height limit to 330 meters. They think some larger skyscrapers will create new jobs. And importantly, this new limit does leave enough room to beat out the Q1 tower. Last but not least, we've got Melbourne. Officially, the height limit is only 315 meters. On paper, that's also too low to beat the Q1 tower. But unlike Brisbane, the authorities in Melbourne are pretty flexible. Apparently, they're willing to make exceptions for skyscrapers which bring exceptional value to the city. Actually, they have made an exception already. A pretty massive exception. This is the STH-BNK, or South Bank, a skyscraper proposal unlike anything Australia has seen before. It's been designed for Melbourne's South Bank. Just remove the vowels and you get the project's name. STH-BNK, also known as Green Spine, would top out at 365 meters. In other words, it would smash the Q1 tower's record. It would also break Melbourne's height limit, but as I said before, the authorities in Melbourne are willing to make exceptions. The city officially approved the project in 2020. In the words of the city's former Lord Mayor, it signals that Melbourne doesn't rest on its laurels and always strives to be bold. But let's not forget, when it comes to skyscrapers, the Gold Coast is pretty bold as well. And last year, at the end of 2025, the current record holders approved a new skyscraper of their own. Here's the proposal. This is One Park Lane. Just like Green Spine, this project has two towers. This shorter tower would be an office building. The taller tower would be residential. Both of them would stand on an elevated podium, which is meant to look like tree roots. It's all very striking and impressive. But to quote the architects who designed it, without question the most striking feature of One Park Lane is the height. The taller tower would have 101 stories, and each reach a staggering, wait for it, 393 meters. That's taller than the Q1 tower, and also taller than Green Spine. It feels like the Gold Coast saw Melbourne's proposal and decided to go one step higher. But what's going on with Sydney? As I said, they recently bumped up their build limit. But the new height is still a little bit too low to compete with Green Spine or One Park Lane. In 2025, they did approve a couple of 300-meter plus skyscrapers. But for now, it looks like they've dropped out of the race for the record. So we've ruled out Brisbane and Sydney. That means that this is now officially a race between Melbourne and the Gold Coast. More specifically, it's a race between Green Spine and One Park Lane. Okay, let's be clear here. There's totally a chance, there's always a chance, that neither of these even get built. Have you heard of Growlow Tower? This was another skyscraper proposed in Melbourne, way back in the 1990s. It was meant to be 500 meters tall. Some sources even put its height at 678 meters. At the time, it would have been more than twice as high as any other building in the country. That project fell through though. It never got built. Who knows, something like this could happen again. Green Spine has already run into a bit of trouble. The company behind it is struggling for finances. They haven't cancelled it yet. Apparently, they're looking for an alternative strategy. But they might just be playing for time. As for One Park Lane, it's still very early and conceptual. And building a successful super tall skyscraper is easier said than done. And who knows, even if these projects go ahead, by the time it happens, maybe Sydney and Brisbane will be back to join the race. Maybe they'll change their build limits and go even taller than Green Spine or One Park Lane. The race to build Australia's tallest skyscraper is still pretty wide open. But which city do you think will win this? Which city do you want to win this? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.